The challenges get harder, the data more complex, the scale off the charts. What's an analyst to do? One answer is a distributed analytics engine built to handle the depth and breadth of today's data sources. Find out why that's now table stakes in today's data driven business world on this episode of Future Proof.
The future is here already. It's just not evenly distributed. Yet. Today's world teems with innovation. The nexus of hardware, software, and human ingenuity promises a revolution in possibilities. What does tomorrow look like? Witness Future Proof.
Sitting here with Steve Sarsfield of OpenText Vertica. And wow, everyone's getting into the racing game these days, Steve. I remember SAP was doing it a few years ago. You guys are doing it. Makes a lot of sense. Tons and tons of data you can process. And of course, the key is the speed of the analysis, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. We talk about engines, we talk about the original racing for cars, right? A lot of that, the data or the things that happened on the original gas engine car races later helped that industry kind of expand and be better. And now we're looking at electric cars, and we're looking at e-racing, which is the format that we're talking about here. And those formats are really helping electric cars be better. And regenerative braking, the tire wear, all sorts of things kind of go into that to help them really win races. And it's been super successful for them to use analytics to do that.
Well, yeah, you can look at the data and understand exactly what happened. When did you get the highest throughput? When did you get the greatest torque? Now with electric cars, it's funny. I actually went to Belgium last year for an electric car race. And
Yeah.
one of the guys, Ellis Spezia, I'm connected to him. He's a fantastic young man. He had the quote of the day, and it went into my headline: all the torque, all the time. I was like, what? Because it's just one
Yeah.
gear and it's electric, and when they just take off running, man.
So there's the race cars can go like 0 to 60 in like 2 seconds, right? They would go faster if they could, but I think they lose traction, right? So there's problems around losing traction if you go to 0 to 60 faster than that, right? And
Right.
top speed of 200 miles an hour, as you saw. So just amazing stats that they have around that. I think a lot of those, you can almost do in a Prius too, right? So that low end torque is super, super important for electric cars.
Yeah, I'm told by the drivers that you have to be careful how you start because it'll
Yes,
just peel out and spin around if you're not
right.
careful. So you do have to get the traction. But I think the key here is in terms of being able to capture all that data. So we have all these sensors now. IoT is just taken off. It really is just off the charts these days. And it's great because you can learn so much. And then to your point, that helps on the design front. It helps all the people who are building the cars, who are planning for the next version of these cars. And there's a lot of data to parse, to analyze. If you don't have a very significant and powerful engine, you're not going to be able to do a lot of that analysis. So that's one of the things you've been able to achieve, right?
Yeah, so we've got some other use cases around IoT data. One of the biggest customers we have is a company called Inritsu. Inritsu actually takes cell phone towers in Europe and they take data off those. So you can imagine if you're a cell phone company in Europe, you might want to know whether your cell phone towers are being overutilized. And if they're being overutilized, might want to bump up the bandwidth of that or put new cell towers in. If they're being underutilized, maybe I'm paying too much for my bandwidth and I want to reduce costs with that, right? So all of that data from every cell phone tower kind of gets put back into a centralized system. Now you can imagine that's a lot of data. And they tried to do this with other solutions on the market, other kind of conventional solutions. So having a scalable database that can answer a query really quickly is a super fundamental problem that you have with IoT data. So taking all that data, bringing it back into Vertica and providing analysis around that, even selling some of that data back to the telcos is their business model. And it's been super, super successful for us. Again, tried to do it with other conventional databases, and they just couldn't get away with it. It was either too expensive or it just wouldn't work, just wouldn't answer a query in time.
Yeah. Well, everyone's doing the vertical orientation, columnar database compression, of course, works
Yeah,
better than row oriented because everything in the column should be the same. And if it's not
yeah,
the same, it's probably bad data. But my history with Vertica goes all the way back to 2005 when I was the web editor at TDWI, and I got
Yeah.
an email from someone saying, "Oh, this guy named Michael Stonebreaker is pushing this whole narrative of one size does not fit all." That was almost 20 years ago. And if you think about what happened after that, we had the whole appliance phase. Of course, we had Netezza, but there was Datopia. There were a whole bunch of them, Datalegro, and that
Mm.
all kind of got consolidated. Of course, Netezza boxes are still out there cranking away. Legacy has a very long tail to it,
Mm.
right? But clearly, Vertica, thanks to Stonebreaker, who arguably invented the modern database, Ingress, right, in Postgres,
Yeah.
he saw this coming, and it's
Right.
interesting because from a development perspective, and certainly in the hardware side, you kind of have to know where things are going and be
Mm.
able to sort of tack into the wind and plan accordingly. And I've been watching what you folks are doing now. These days with expanding out with Magellan, maybe kind of talk about how that evolution took place, how you went from the initial focus of columnar storage, structured data analysis,
Mm.
but blazing fast speed, to now this more open view of the world as Gen AI comes in and, frankly, places everything in its crosshairs.
Yeah, I mean, I think behind AI is machine learning and AI or AI algorithms, right? So in order to do some of those predictions that you have to do, it's all about, doing predictions in an algorithm. So training the models and then, doing predictions based on that. That's something that we added to the platform probably 2 years ago, and we started to continue to add machine learning and AI-based algorithms to the Vertica platform. It's
Hmm.
interesting, I think when people think of Vertica, I think they think of that old Stonebreaker model, and they think of us around 2002, 2003, when we first came out. And we were really innovative when it comes to columnar store databases. Um, we haven't been sitting still though that whole time, right? So we've been doing a lot of things. So columnar, yes, that's the basis. That's this table stakes that you have around Vertica.
No
But
pun
we've added
intended.
some really interesting things over the years. So machine learning in database machine learning is one where not only can I do SQL queries, but in my SQL I can have machine learning running and doing predictions around that. So if I'm doing a shopping cart application and I want to say, hey, you bought this, do you want to buy that? Right, a recommendation engine I think is a great application for something like Vertigo.
Hmm.
Um, we were one of the first to do a separation of compute and storage on premises. Like there are some companies that have this new concept of taking a database and making sure your data storage is separate from your compute. That way you can scale and be elastic and all of that. We were one of the first to do that. We have partners like Vast and Dell and a lot of Cloudian, a lot of other object store partners that we work with, so that if you want to do that on premises as well as the cloud, you can very easily do that. So it's kind of this concept of being able to take data and move it seamlessly from the cloud and back and forth on premise, I think is another thing that we've been working pretty hard on. So a lot of innovation since over the past 10 years for sure.
Yeah, and let's talk about distributed SQL. So
Yeah.
you have this new engine, right? So the original SQL has been around forever. It's a standard. It's a beautiful thing because a lot of people know SQL and know how to use SQL. Granted, again, this Gen AI stuff is disrupting a little bit, but SQL
Yeah.
has been around for a long time. I don't think it's going anywhere. In fact, I remember the days when NoSQL came along and thought that was going to save the world. And then what happened is they all put SQL engines on top of their NoSQL databases. And so clearly that was a bit of a miscalculation. But can you talk about distributed SQL? How does that actually change from an architectural perspective? How does it change performance? What you're basically enabling greater scale and diversity, but
Yeah.
maybe talk a bit about what that really means.
Yeah, I mean, for us, I know that a lot of databases have distributed SQL, and it's sort of like a different syntax for the SQL language. So I see that also in some graph databases that are very popular in the market. For Vertica, SQL is SQL. So when you do a SQL command, it will work on one node and it will work on 30 nodes. And behind the scenes, we kind of take care of all of that processing and all of the work that you have to do in order to bring clusters or nodes together to answer the question. So SQL is SQL. SQL also applies, by the way, to data lakes. So we have the ability to go out and read an external table like a Parquet file or an org file. And the only difference between doing that and reading the direct database is when you're, when you're setting up, you say, select database as external table, select database. And that's the only difference from there on. You can use the same SQL commands for an external table as you can for an internal table. So for us, there really is no syntactical difference. It's all kind of handled behind the scenes. I'll add one more thing too, and that is that we recently added Python. So that a lot of the young folks, when they're coming out of school, they want to do data science, they want to do Python. So now that's available as a main language for Vertica. So think about that. I've got a lot of data. I want to do some Python analysis of it, Python-based analysis of it, using pie charts and things like that. I can use the Vertica cluster to access 1 trillion rows of data and use Python to do that. And so that's a feature that we recently added to Vertica.
Yeah, that's cool stuff, and it seems to me a case of rubber finally meeting road in data warehousing, hooking up with data science, because it's been my experience in researching this over the last 15 years that most data science teams are completely separate from the data warehousing folks,
I agree.
which doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, why would you? Because the whole point is to analyze your data to understand what's happening. And I think that's starting, and it sounds to me like you are a pioneer in helping to fuse those worlds, because what you want to be able to do is leverage the capacity of this engine to do massive amounts of analytics very, very quickly, and which is what Vertica has always been known for, but then bring in this other whole world, which is the context, right?
Yeah.
So the unstructured is the context, and Python is a very powerful language in terms of being able to bring things together. For example, I remember this is several years ago now, but in the risk management space, Python is very well appreciated because it allows organizations to tap into multiple different types of systems and then build some rules around that, right? So instead of trying to do your risk assessment on on your website or in your data warehouse or in your network, you're tapping into all that stuff to be able to get the biggest picture. And I think that's where this stuff is going, right? Is get the bigger picture now, do the kind of analysis we did before, but add all this context to it. What do you think?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There is this separation of data science and analysts, I guess, within an organization. We see that all the time. One of the things that I think is the first step for the merger of those two areas is to have organizations be able to operationalize data science, right? So in data science, what happens a lot is a lot of people bring their own tools, whatever they learned in college, be it R or Python or whatever, right? They bring them all in, they take all the data, they copy it to a laptop, they do the data science. But that's an experiment more than it is operationalized, right? So once that experiment has happened, and once you're like, hey, maybe I have something here, and maybe we should add this to our weekly, daily, monthly reports, then we can operationalize that. So let's bring that into a process where, I have the data. I don't have to move it out of any data warehouse or any data lake. I can just get access to it and then operationalize those predictions. And I think that's one of the things we're starting to see with some of our customers out there.
Talking all things analytics at scale, waves of innovation with Steve Sarsfield of Vertica, now part of OpenText. And we were just chatting in the break there about developments in the industry and what's happening out there. And there is so much happening. And, we kind of hinted at Gen AI in the opening segment, but maybe I'll throw that back out there and just talk about where I see the future going for companies that really want to stay focused and get good information for their business people to make decisions. Well, that's the whole point of data warehousing. That's the whole point of analytics, is to be able to analyze large amounts of data, to see the patterns, to get some ideas of what to do. As we've already said, you want to operationalize that stuff, so it's not just on a dashboard somewhere, it's actually changing how the business gets run. But if you look at some of the broader movements in the industry, I was just joking that on the one hand, if you go to Google something, which we've all become addicted to, maybe you use DuckDuckGo, a few people use Yahoo, but Google is still the elephant in the room for sure.
Bing, don't forget Bing.
And Bing, right? Microsoft Bing. They're scratching along with this ChatGPT
Yeah.
acquisition. I mean, that just woo, that set the world on fire,
Mhm.
right? Then Google like went whoa, and then Amazon comes in, throws $4 billion at Anthropic, and I looked them up. They're like, 80 employees or something. I'm like, all right, so that's a lot of money per employee. Like, what are you guys going to be working on? I guess we'll find out. But my point here is that, on the one side, you Google something and you get all these sponsored ads. There's like 20 of them, and you're
Yeah.
like digging down to finally get this on. Like, how many people go to page 3 when you Google something? So that's changing. It's, I think, losing some of its veracity that we've lived for years now. And then on the other side, you got Gen AI just sort of making stuff up. Well, what's in the middle? I think the answer is going to be in using embeddings for your own single instance AI model in your organization, which I think everyone is going to want to have one. I think that's going to be the new big thing, is that every company is going to go out there, they're going to pick their poison, either Bard or ChatGPT or one of these other ones. And you have to start out your embeddings. So what are embeddings? I'm calling it a second chance for data. That's my way to describe this. And I think if you're very careful about how you curate your AI engine with your trusted data, which you get from a data warehouse, for example, and from other sources, you're going to give yourself a real leg up in this next wave of innovation, which is Gen AI. But what do you think about all that, Steve?
Yeah, I think what's going to come down to is the software companies themselves are going to start to embed generative AI in their applications. Think about it. If you're a company and you make a human resources software, and it is a help desk for human resources, so people come, you can log into this portal, you can get answers about your healthcare or whatever human resources
Right.
question you may have. Um, you know, if you make one of those pieces of software now and you're not thinking about generative AI to improve your product, then you're probably going to lose the battle.
Right.
So you think about that. Think about like all of the questions and answers that some human resource person has answered, but they probably answered those same questions over and
Right.
over again every day, taking those emails, digesting those, and putting them into a better bot, right? Something better that answers questions. We've all used chatbots. Chatbots are terrible. But if you can
They
make
have been.
a chatbot that actually answers questions for you,
Right.
then you have one leg up on the competition. So that's just one example. All the industries I think will start to embed generative AI within their applications. I know we're doing it here at OpenText for some of the other applications that we have. If you don't do it, you're really sort of out of the race, I think.
Yeah. Well, think about it. I think that the chatbots really took over or became prominent because in-site search stinks.
Mm.
Like if you ever go to the search engine for some corporation
Yeah.
and search, I mean, Google had a whole line of business, other companies had lines of business around that, trying to enable enterprise search basically
Yeah.
of content in your website, and you would get crap answers. You would just get
Yeah.
like press releases and things that are meaningless. Like, I don't want any of that. Right? So that's kind of where it came from. But I think you're right that the Gen AI wave is going to fuse with the chatbot realm, and kind of to keep this focused on the analytics side of the equation. Again, if you do your embeddings right, if you
Mm.
build out your environment in a responsible way, that's going to be your anchors of truth, is how Brian Raymond of Unstructured IO called it. I was like, oh, that's good.
That's a
Anchors of
good one.
truth. They're like moorings, right? Kind of. So because the Gen AI, what happens? So a good friend of mine came up with a great term. He said these large language models don't have an epistemological boundary, meaning they don't know what they don't know, and that's when they hallucinate and make stuff up, right? It's I won't name the country, but there are some countries I've been told don't ask for directions by the locals because they'll be embarrassed that they don't know, so they'll just tell you something,
Yeah.
go wandering off into nowhere. Well, you don't want that, so you want to have this trusted source, and I think that's going to be the job of data warehouses and true data products. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think I mentioned at the beginning of the call, those three engines have to come together. So you mentioned enterprise search, right? IDLE does a pretty good job, I think, with enterprise search. And we've also innovated quite a bit with IDLE over the years so that your search results are a little bit better than they used to be. They're a little more intelligent. They use large language models, as I mentioned. So they're using language models to try to identify, for example, PII that exists within your big blob of text that works out there. So in terms of enterprise search, I think we're improving there too. Um, I think with enterprise search, the value that you can add there is just being able to have a conversation with your data. So if
Hmm.
you can type in, show me all the cars that are blue, right?
Right.
And IDLE has analyzed all that, shown you all the blue cars. It can kind of bring back the results and show you that. So having that kind of conversation, I think, is will make it really easy for most of the organizations out there.
Yeah, I think so too. And I'm reminded of an idea that popped into my head a few years ago, and I did a keynote on this before the pandemic hit, and it was all about AI versus data warehousing. And I said, I don't think it's AI versus data warehousing. I think you want both of these worlds,
Yeah.
and when you have them both, you kind of get a sort of virtual depth perception because the data warehouse is going to give you the certified numbers that people work very hard on to get accurate as possible. Sometimes, of course, they could be a little bit off, but
Right.
by and large, you can trust this information. That's your one eye, and let's say you're right, and your left eye is AI, which
Mm.
is just surfing for things.
Right.
And what I've noticed is that with these engines, they will almost invariably show you something that you did not expect.
Exactly.
And so that's pretty cool, right? Because a big part of analysis is looking for the outliers. What are the outliers? Are they mistakes or are they the trends? And there's always something. And there's something in the main, like wherever the main focus is, okay, well, you understand that. But whatever those outliers are, that's where you want to pay some attention. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, data lake and data warehouse are going to give you expected results. You're going to know exactly what you want to ask most of the time, and it's you know that it's probably going to deliver the results that you expect most of the time. Again, with AI, generative AI, probably it's different. It's different that it may present some results that you hadn't thought of, and think of things that you hadn't thought of, and look at relationships that you may not have thought of that exist within the data. And
Yeah.
that's going to be part of the boom for that whole thing. Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's what I saw another great quote I heard the other day. I bet you like this one too. I was asking a guy, a CTO, what's your big thought on machine learning and what people should know? And he said, learning. His point was like, we have to learn how this stuff works. And
Yeah.
what I've noticed playing around with Bard and ChatGPT is that you do have to play around with it to kind of get a feel for it, right? This is an engine. It's like a car. I mean, you played that video of the guy from the race car, the Formula cars. You have to drive the car to get a feel for it. And the best drivers in the world, if they get a new car, they have to drive it around and just get a feel for it. And that's something what people need to do with this Gen AI stuff, especially in context of analytics, right? Because you're trying to find answers. So you start using this stuff, play around with it, just see what it reflects back to you.
Mm.
It's a very educational process that can happen like any moment that you use the stuff, right?
Yeah, there is this whole concept that some companies don't want you to use generative AI, right? They still want you to kind of use the old-fashioned ways.
Right.
I think that'll fade. Listen, when you need to write something really quick, a paragraph, and you can have generative ChatGPT or generative AI help you write that paragraph, super, super helpful, right? Obviously, it doesn't give you 100% perfect results. You have to go back and edit it. And that's why you're there, right? You're the human in the middle. There's a lot to be said about sort of the human or the person in the middle, right? One of the things that we look for example, in AI and IDLE, think about a police organization, and they have all of these tapes of people being murdered or killed or bad things happening to people. And your job is to kind of go through all of those tapes and look at that and say, okay, where is my suspect? Can I find my suspect in all this big long list of tapes? Well, if you have AI, you can get the bot to do that for you. I don't have to go through that physical trauma of watching all these crimes occur.
Wow.
And the bot can take it for me and say, here, I think these are the clips that you want to look at. Instead of looking at all 1,000 clips, I can look at these 5 clips and say, yeah, those are the ones I want. So I think generative AI will help with that as well. And that's one of the things that we do in the IDLE world.
Yeah, that's really cool stuff. And it's very powerful in the discovery side of the equation, right? You have discovery, you have inference, you have decisions that are made. These are different component parts of the workflow, if you will. And I've always loved discovery the most. Maybe it's just me. I think it's fun to kind of look around and wander around. And this gives you a much richer tool, a much richer platform to do that discovery. So it's not just, I mean, think about it. First it was spreadsheets and we're like, look at the numbers, like, all right, sort top down, see what the biggest ones are, sort bottom up, see what the smallest ones are. Okay, something in between. A smart person can figure out a lot just looking at spreadsheets, but that's not very useful, really. Then you go to dashboards. Again, if you can drill down, it gets interesting because I can kind of drill around. Now with Gen AI, it's like an end around on the whole industry. You can just kind of go around this way and look into all sorts of different places. And I think it's going to be real important too to do some PII discovery to know what you're pointing this thing at, because there might be stuff in there you don't want the engine to see, and that's a big part of the process, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you're a lawyer and you want to kind of overwhelm a law firm, what you do is you drown them in evidence, right? You just take and you send them tons
Right.
and tons of evidence, and you kind of just say, here you go, have at it, sue us if you want, right? So it's a room full of evidence that you're trying to get. Well, we actually have a division in OpenText, a part of our division that allows you to kind of do that discovery. So you mentioned discovery. If I'm a small law firm, or if I, don't want to invest in all that money of just kind of going through all those documents, I can actually do that discovery through AI. And it's super, super helpful to kind of get through that process as well. So, this is going to impact lawyers as much as it is anyone else within our organization.
Oh, sure,
Yeah.
sure. And procedure, anything that's procedural. These Gen AI engines are pretty good too at knowing what workflows look like in processes, for example. And so,
Yeah.
you can sit there and just learn. If you're a business analyst, and again, you've got some of this technology at your behest, you can search around and find all kind of stuff. Now, again, you have to vet it. You have
Mm.
to make sure that it's accurate, but the discovery side of the equation has just been blown wide open by this stuff, in my opinion. What do you think?
Yeah, there's always going to be a human in the process, and I don't know if there's always going to be, but there should be, right? There should be someone. We kind of look at it as augmenting human intelligence with AI intelligence,
Hmm.
and that's what we're trying to do with IDLE. That's what we're trying to do with some of the other divisions that we have within OpenText, is just augment what you have, making your life and your job a little bit easier.
Yeah. And talk a bit about idle. Just explain to the audience what that is and how it works.
Yeah, I mean, IDLE is really a collection of tools that really used for development. So we're really aiming this product at developers and people who develop their own applications and use these sort of tools to enhance applications they have. But again, it's a way for you to look through voice, video, audio, and understand it and do some analysis around it. So if I have a video feed and it's facing a room that I'm pretty sure that no one is ever going to go in because it's a top secret room, I can set up a video feed and it can alert me when it sees a face and that walks in. Very simple. I can also set it up, though. Next level would be, only certain people are allowed in that room, so I can do facial recognition. And if someone is outside of that realm and they walk into that room, I can alert me for that. I can do things like a recognition of traffic that's going. So if cars, buses, motorcycles going down the street, I want to recognize those in a video feed and sort of accumulate some data around that. I can accumulate data around that. So voice, video, audio, that's the unstructured data we're talking about. But unstructured data also exists in big blobs of text. So I may have PDF files, I may have a OneDrive somewhere full of text, I may have TXT files, CSV files, et cetera, et cetera. So how do I make sure that none of those CSV files in my organization have personally identifiable information that's unencrypted? Because that's something I want to do if I'm a bank or if I'm almost any corporation nowadays. I can have IDLE do that. I can have IDLE go out, take a look at that, connect to those, and then try to parse through that and understand whether there's PII in there. Not only like US names and addresses, but global name and addresses, right? And so trying to understand that and making sure that we identify that is the key thing. So it's kind of a set of tools for allowing you to develop those types of applications within your organization.